Hey everybody, I'm Michael White, and this is my podcast, The Babylonian. I'm a studying theologian, Second Temple Jewish literature junkie, and a big fan of foreign concepts that force me to read the Bible like never before. And on this podcast, I hope to help lead you after me in finding out more about all these foreign concepts. So, whether you're a layman Bible fan or scholar and theology freak, this podcast is just for you. I've even read other religious texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Pseudepigrapha, the Quran, the Book of Mormon, and more, and you can find all my notes and thoughts on those items on my website with the link in the show notes, or by searching thebabylonian.com. With all that said, let's Bible on. The Bible, as some claim, the first round earth text to ever exist. The text that would actually prove that the world was a spheroid in the center of space and not flat. But really, how did the biblical authors conceive of the cosmos? What did they picture when they thought of the world or the universe? Well, surprise, surprise, it's actually flat. Interested to understand how they came to these conclusions and how we can reconcile these conceptions with our own contemporary understandings of the world being a spheroid in the middle of space? Continue to listen as I will continue to explain this in this episode of The Bible. So before we jump into today's episode of The Babylonian, I first wanted to mention that all the episodes before this one, especially not just the most recent episode, but the episode before that on the historicity of the Hebrew Bible and the truth that's contained in it, are going to be very important for understanding this one. So if you haven't listened to those, I would very much highly recommend that you listen to all of them before getting to this one. And I do also want to remind anyone who's listening to this podcast episode that just as with all the other ones that precede it, this podcast episode has in its link a link to the document that goes with this episode on the biblical cosmos. So you can use it to read through as I go through this episode, to reference for later, or whatever you see fine for it. I would highly recommend it. It comes with charts and diagrams as well, and I think it can be very useful. I've heard a lot of people already talk about how it's helped them understand the Bible better. So with all that said, I just want to jump right in and start talking about the biblical cosmos. Now, the word cosmos, C-O-S-M-O-S, for those of you who do not know, is just kind of the fancy term for universe. But when we say the word universe, at least for myself, and I'm sure for most listeners, the first idea that comes to our head is one tiny little pebble floating around in the middle of a really gigantic galaxy out in nowhere in space. And that is not at all the idea that the biblical authors had when they were writing about the Bible. For them, they saw the earth as not being a planet, but a flat disk. Well, not really a disk, as there were different dimensions under it and above it. But they saw it as flat, more or less. They were flat earthers, but not like many of the flat earthers that you'll meet today. We'll get more into that closer towards the end of this podcast. But they were definitely flat earthers. And it's not without significance that they were flat earthers. There's a lot of meaning to the way that they present the world as being flat. And if we don't understand that, then we will actually be missing out on a lot of truth that comes from the Bible. So before I actually explain their entire view of the world, because it's much more complicated than just saying it's flat. And if you only understand it as flat, you stop here, you go on, you're still really not going to get very much out of the Bible. But first, I just want to mention a couple of New Testament concepts that are based on the biblical cosmos, and how if you don't understand the biblical cosmos, you're just going to miss these. One concept: Jesus ascends into the heavens. Jesus is literally floating up. In today's cosmos, the word heaven is just like an entirely different place. It doesn't really like touch the earth. It's just completely different. And, we kind of think of the heavens as being up and like consider it with the clouds. But a lot of us in contemporary developed America have already flown over the clouds. And we know that there aren't actually those naked baby angels that we have painted on our church ceilings and walls up sitting on those clouds. And so why does Jesus ascend into the heavens? Why does Jesus float up? What does that even mean? And then also, numerous times, you have Paul, and even in the Old Testament, there's references, for example, the Ten Commandments. Think about the Ten Commandments. When when God prohibits idolatry, he says that the humans shall not make images of anything in the heavens above, on the earth, or anything under the earth. Under the earth, is he thinking about animals that burrowed their way down like moles? What is he thinking about and saying when he says under the earth? Is he talking about demons down in hell? Well, we are going to consider that for sure. But right now, I'm just trying to make this as problematic as I possibly can to help you to understand that this is a problem that when we come to better understand it, we will come to better understand the scriptures as a whole. Another thing, Jesus in Matthew chapter 4, the beginning of Matthew chapter 4, he's taken up to the temple. He's taken up to a high place, and he sees all the kingdoms of the world. Now, how is this happening if the earth is spheroid? How is that happening? The answer, it simply can't. It would have to be a flat earth. Now, the fact that the devil is just taking him up there does not, it's not really showing that this is something that he was physically doing necessarily. It seems that it's more of kind of an apocalyptic or revelatory vision that's happening. And so you do have that there, but even in the vision is presented as the world as we encounter it, a flat earth. And in this episode, I even want to argue that most Americans today actually believe that the earth is flat. Before I jump into the Bible and the flat earth, I want to problematize this. Even if you're not a Christian and you're listening to this, I want to make this a really big problem for you. Because our ideas, the ways that we talk about things and conceive of things, is as if the earth is flat. So let me give you an example. Say it's pretty late and we're looking at the horizon and we're seeing how the sun is just starting to touch it. And I say that we're about to have a sunset. Is there anything wrong with what I just said? Anything at all? Now, consider this. Close your eyes and picture a sunset. What do you see? Are you seeing it from space, from outside, and you see the Earth floating around in space, and you see this? You see it floating around the sun, as we know it scientifically to happen? Or are you picturing it from your own perspective, where you're maybe sitting out on your porch, you're looking out over a field, and you're seeing the sun set behind some trees and a very picturesque background? Now, I've already instilled in you, I've already kind of shown you, I hope that you're kind of understanding what I'm trying to say. The very fact that we still speak of the earth and the other celestial bodies in terms of the earth being flat and the center of the universe shows that, to an extent, we today still experience the world as being flat. So, from a scientific perspective, of course, I agree with the consensus of scholars that the world is round. I know that we've taken pictures of it, as I hope you do too. However, even if I'm just speaking secularly as an English person living in 21st century America, I always speak of the earth as if it's flat. There simply aren't terms that are scientifically accurate for a sunrise or sunset. Now, if you didn't find a problem with me using the term sunrise or sunset, then you're actually conceding that in one way or another the earth is flat, and that the earth is the center of the universe. Because again, I want you to consider this. Scientifically speaking, the sun does not move around the earth. Scientifically speaking, the sun is not moving in relationship to the earth, but the earth in relationship to the sun. But what words would you use to describe that? As human beings, we don't talk about us as, oh, we're just about to move around the sun in a way in which, from our perspective, it might seem as if the sun is setting or as the sun is rising. We say, no, the sun is setting or the sun is rising, because we see things from our own perspective. And even when you're picturing a sunset or a sunrise, I'm just going to go out on a limb and assume that you're probably assuming it from your own perspective and not from the perspective of space. Does that make you wrong? Well, no, not really. Because, again, you're describing something that is real to you and to how you experience things and think of things. Unless you've been in space for quite a while, and when you think of the Earth, you think of just this tiny dot in the middle of nowhere, that's probably how you conceive of, you probably conceive of the Earth as just this land that you live on, and everything moves around the earth. That's how I conceive of it, and that's how most of us do. And even when we think of sunset or sunrise, not even just the word or the term, we often think about it actually literally moving around us. And it took me some time in school, even though I knew that the earth was round, to learn that it didn't, as I'm sure it did for quite a few of us, because that is the way in which we experience things, and that's the way that we talk about things. So there's almost this semantic or phenomenology talking about how we experience things, semantics talking about words. There's a semantic or phenomenological truth about the earth being flat that is not actually contradictory to the scientific view that it's round. It is paradoxical in that it seems like it might be contradictory, but in actuality, it isn't, because those are two different concepts, two different realms of truth they aren't on the same plane, and so they don't touch each other. But they are, if they were on the same planes, be in totally different areas. So why does it matter that we talk and think and feel like the earth is flat? Well, because there is truth to that. The truth to that is found in the meaning of it. The meaning of it is that we feel that we are the center of the universe. And that's true in a sense. There's no other inhabited planet, at least that we know of, where intelligent beings are creating sophisticated, developed cities and architecture, let alone actual living, breathing animals that aren't anatomical and small. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the word. Smaller than, concerning the size of an atom. Can't even think of the word for that. But here on Earth, we have all types of living beings. We have humans, and so there is a truth in that things do revolve around us. And we're the ones moving out of space into the moon and later to Mars and going further and further out. And so there's a way in which, when we're thinking about meaning, concerning meaning, we are at the center of the universe. There is no amount of meaning, more meaning in this existence, spatial existence. There's no more meaning than in the earth. The earth is the most meaningful place in all of existence. And that's not just true for contemporaries. It's actually, in a sense, even more true for our ancient Israelite authors of the Bible. Except they also conceived of the heavens, which is another problem for a round earth idea that tries to impose itself upon the Bible. So, for example, open up, this is going to be the last problem that I bring up. Open up to Genesis chapter 1. Now, this is what it says in verses 6 and continuing on. It says, and I'm reading in the NASB 2020 version, it says, "Then God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were below the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day." So within a contemporary round earth model, there simply is no conception for what this biblical text is talking about, because we don't conceive of the heavens as being anything held up as being a dome, a vault, or an expanse, or firmament, as many translations will differ on this word. But they all have this conception of something that is holding up waters. What is that? It's something physical that's holding up actual waters. Well, it can't be the atmosphere. The atmosphere doesn't hold up any waters. And clearly, without this thing, there would be waters coming down and crashing down and bringing about the destruction that we see in the second verse, that God's Spirit is hovering over the waters. So what is this? How do we make sense of this? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be exploring in the rest of this podcast episode. Now that I hope that you are convinced that the earth is flat in one way or another, I want to begin by reading this quote from an author of a book called The Biblical Cosmos, Pilgrim's Guide to the Weird and Wonderful World of the Bible. It's by Robin A. Perry, and I read this book some years ago, and I just continue to recommend it on Biblical Cosmos. It is a really great book that has informed not all of this, but quite a bit of this episode of the podcast. And so I want to read kind of like the preface to this book, what he has to say. He says, "Now there was a graded scale of holiness in this cosmos that worked along a vertical axis. Heaven, God's dwelling, was supremely holy, while Sheol, the dead zone, was the part of the cosmos furthest away on the holiness spectrum. We could represent that diagrammatically as a cylinder of holiness, in which the further away one is from God, the less holiness there is. We should not think of the biblical cosmos as composed of completely sealed off units. It is true that the zones are distinct, and it is also true that movement between them is restricted. However, there is fluidity. Humans descend to Sheol, the underworld, when they die, and on very rare occasions can ascend from Sheol to the land of the living again, as with the prophet Samuel. And he's referring there to the end of 1 Samuel when King Saul at the time calls him up by a necromancer. On exceptional occasions, a human can even ascend to heaven, as is the cases of Enoch in Genesis chapter 5 and Elijah. And some heavenly beings, too, can sometimes come down from heaven to earth and then reascend to heaven. And some fallen angels are cast into a subterranean prison. But most obviously, God is associated with all the spheres of creation. Heaven, the highest heaven, is, of course, his throne room. But he also works through the stars, the weather, through historical events on the earth, and even Sheol is open before him. In the New Testament, as we will see later in this tour guide, Jesus, God made flesh, moves from heaven to earth to the underworld, then back to earth, and finally returns to the right hand of God in heaven. He is thus Lord of every sphere of creation. Okay, now this idea of there being some heavens above, some earth below, and then even an area, a realm even lower than that earth in the Old Testament called Sheol, is actually not even just presupposed to be a flat earth, even among scholars of the Bible today, but even if you were to pick up Second Temple Jewish literature, one of the most popular of these being one Enoch, you would see in his vision of going throughout the cosmos that even he speaks of there being domes of the heaven and all the different weather cycles coming through them. And this is from the original context of the Bible, the Second Temple Jewish literature that was widely reproduced and even referenced in the book of Jude. And so I kind of want to go through what this cosmos looked like in the Bible. And I'm going through kind of a chart that's here in the notes, if you're reading through them, just under that quote. And you can also even pull up an image of the biblical cosmos. If you search up in Google Images the biblical cosmos, you'll get a lot of different images that all have the basic concepts that I'm about to go over right here. Some have a little bit of variance on more minor details. But I just kind of wanted to go over this real quick. So first, you have the highest heaven. Paul will even speak about the third heaven. He says that he knew somebody, and scholars are pretty much in consensual agreement that he's speaking about himself, but he says that he knows somebody who ascended into the third heaven. And in that space, you have God, of course. As Solomon is going to say, the heaven, not even the highest heaven, can contain God. And he says that, I believe, in the 7th, or maybe the 6th or 3rd, I can't remember, chapter of First Kings. You also have the divine council there, and we'll get into that later, but consider Isaiah 6, or just think about the council of angelic spiritual beings. So, anyways, you have the highest heaven, and that is what's made on the second day. Again, as we just read in Genesis chapter 1 about God splitting the water from the water. So if you can't access a picture of the biblical cosmos, or even just look at one once and get a glance, I'll kind of give you a mental image. So Genesis 1, 6 through 7, God says, "Let there be an expanse, a firmament, a vault," or the Hebrew word there is rakia, to separate water from water. And so God makes this expanse, and he separates waters below from the waters above the expanse. And so what I want you to picture is just flat water, abysmal water, so it goes all the way down into nothingness. And this is kind of the picture that we get from Genesis 1-2, that the earth was formless and desolate emptiness, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. The deep is talking about abysmal chaos waters that go down into straight nothingness. So picture that, and then God separates the water from the waters with a solid dome. And the word rakia there is a Hebrew word, as some scholars, such as Robert Alter and TaNaKh have noted, and probably some more, this is used as a verb sometimes to talk about hammering something out. So imagine maybe like some metal that's just put in a hot fire, and it's hammered out to make kind of a dome shape. And that is kind of like rising out of these deep waters with no pit. And as it rises out, there's these waters that are staying on top of that dome. And I don't think too scientifically as if they're like coming off the dome and then they come back into that deepless pit. But I want you to imagine flowing waters, this big, almost like pot, upside down pot that's over the cosmos, and there's waters all on top of that. And so that's separating the waters from the waters. In fact, these are the waters that are going to flood the world in Noah's time. So again, there's these waters that are below and these waters that are above. And it says in Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, that in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open. And the floodgates, so there's apparently some gates up there in the heavens of the sky were opened. And the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So this rain is not just coming from the clouds, and there are Bible verses that do talk about rain coming from the clouds. For example, even in the New Testament, and there are some in the Old Testament as well, but in the New Testament, Jesus talks about how people can look at the clouds and see how the rain is going to be. And so we know that they conceived of some rain coming from there. But in Noah's time, all of this is let back loose on itself. And that's how, the story of Noah's Ark is a retelling of creation, because these waters are going back into their pre-creation state where they're no longer separated. All the waters from the heavens are coming back and joining the waters from down below. And there's total and complete destruction. And then God brings them back. And God says, I will never flood the whole earth again. So there's a difference between that and there being a local, smaller flood. Noah's flood was cosmological. So it was filling the whole cosmos. It's going back to the pre-creation state where the whole cosmos was just a flood of absolute nothingness. And God is saying, I will never bring it back to that state again. It was that state in Genesis 1:2, and it goes back to that state in Genesis chapter 7. And so for it to go back to that state, God would have to open the floodgates of the heavens and let pour down from there the chaotic waters from the beginning. Now, the emptiness, the formlessness without void that's talked about in most translations in Genesis 1:2, Robert Alter calls it welter and waste, and Everett Fox calls it wild and waste. That is talking about waters, or the deep, the ocean, the abyss, are different translations for, the deep. It's talking about waters, chaos waters. And the meaning of this is there's no life. There can't be any life. It's just darkness and waters. And God solves the darkness by bringing about light. And in the second day, he solves the waters by splitting the waters apart from each other. And then, let's see what he does in the third day. In verse 9, this is what he says. He says, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit according to their kind, with seed in them. And it was so. And the earth produced vegetation, and all these different things. And so there you have it. He splits the water from the waters. Now that you have that image of these waters, and then you have this almost upside down pot with waters on top of it, now picture a land mass, just islands, I guess, getting pulled out of the water. That's what the picture of verse 9 is. Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And for the dry land to appear, he has to pull the land out of the waters. Now, remember, actually continuing on in verse 14, let's note this first, is that God says, let there be lights in the expanse or vault or firmament of the heavens. So he places the lights, which, in Genesis 1 he's using the term light instead of stars and moon and sun intentionally, because those words were also words used for ancient deities of their time, so it's kind of showing that they aren't actually deities that have any competition with God here. But he says, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens. So it actually puts those lights into the heavens. They're in the heavens themselves. And then later, you see in verse 20, he says, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the heavens in the open expanse of the heavens. And God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves. With them the waters swarmed according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. And so where do these birds fly? They fly, as it says, in the open expanse of the heavens. So just across the face of the heavens, just underneath them. Whereas the stars are put actually in them. So you have the sphere of the heavens. You have even a third heaven. Now realize that the term heaven is actually always, whether or not it's translated this way, it's always referred to as plural. God created the heavens and the earth. Did you notice that? There's a third heaven, there's multiple heavens. And so, there have been multiple interpretations of this in Second Temple Jewish literature, but all of them recognize that there are multiple heavens, and they all debate about what's in what heaven and what's in the other heaven. But in the Bible, there are multiple heavens, and not even the highest of those heavens can contain God, even according to Solomon. And even below the heavens is where you get clouds, which have water, birds flying across the heavens, and in the heavens are these stars and lights for the earth. And then you also have the earth itself. And so the earth is separated from the sea. And again, there's chaos waters under the earth still. And these are often compared with Sheol. In fact, if you want to do some homework, you can look at Jonah chapter 2, where Jonah is in the belly of the whale, and he talks about his time being thrown into the waters, and he compares it to Sheol, and he even talks about Sheol almost having these tentacles that are dragging him down there. In the land, you have the humans and the animals, and in the sea, you have the fish and sea monsters. It says sea monsters. Now, look at the translations, and you'll see that among multiple different translations, there are different words for this. And later on, as you get into the Bible, you'll see multiple times in the Psalms, and even in, I believe, Isaiah and in Job, there's a reference to the Leviathan. It's sometimes called Rahab, and that is a ferocious sea monster. And so that is really the most basic picture of the cosmos. And so you have the earth and humans, and that's where humans and animals and all of us live. But primarily humans, because humans are the images of God there. Then you have the heavens, which is where God and all the spiritual beings live. And below, and notice God doesn't create this. It's never mentioned on the first page of the Bible. In fact, it won't be later until the Joseph story that this is mentioned. But there later comes the idea of Sheol, which is just talking about the grave, death, the pit. And these are all different words to talk about the Old Testament underworld. So there's things under the world, under the earth, there's the earth, and there's things over the earth. Over the earth is the heavens. And they did see this as physical, because, again, Jesus physically ascended into the heavens. But the importance wasn't found in the fact that it was physical, but in the fact that it had meaning. It gave meaning to humans and how we understand the world. And again, we'll get into that some more later. But actually, I kind of wanted to just go a little bit further in depth into a lot of these different concepts that are very important for understanding the biblical cosmos as we see throughout the Bible. Okay, so next I wanted to talk about hell. Now, depending on your translation, the word hell can actually be a translation for three different words. Actually, four if you're considering that Hebrew and Greek are different languages and kind of, well, it gets confusing. But anyways, so these Hebrew and Greek words actually overlap some. So in Hebrew, you have the term Sheol, which is used throughout the Bible, again referring to the underworld, and it's seen as being physically underneath the world. And then you have the Greek word Hades, which, if you know anything about Greek mythology, is the term for the underworld that they use. And it's used in the New Testament as well because that's the Greek word that they have. And so even in books, even in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible called the Septuagint, they translate the Hebrew word Sheol as Hades. And then you have the Hebrew word Abaddon, which John himself refers to in Revelation. And in Greek, that's referred to as Tartaro or Tartarus. And that is the deepest, darkest part of the underworld, so as to say, where the angels, the fallen angels, so as to say, are all chained. As you'll see in, I can't remember if it's 1st or 2nd Peter, but one of those. So the first term, Sheol or Hades, again, it just means the pit or grave. It's dark, subterranean chamber where all people go after death. That's including the righteous. If you read in Psalm 89:48, it's in other Psalms as well. And again, references for what I've just said, Job 17:13, Deuteronomy 32:22. And in fact, they saw it as physically being down to the point where the ancient people only mined down to a certain level because they didn't want to mine straight into Sheol. And you can read about that in Job 28:1-11. People in Sheol are cut off from God, again, all throughout the Psalms, especially 6:5. Because it's the opposite of heaven. And that comparison is made all the time, but you can see it, especially in Job 17:16. And while people don't have access to God from Sheol, right, the Psalms talk about, how can I praise you if I'm dead? I can only do that if I'm alive. God still has full access to Sheol. Psalm 139 that talks about how God is everywhere and can always hear us and is always with us. In verse 8 talks about how he even is with us when we are in Sheol. He has access to that realm, even though we don't have access to him from that realm. And so by the time of Jesus, Jews had developed the concept of Abraham's bosom. Remember, this is a problem that a lot of us Christians don't really consider that much. But throughout the Hebrew Bible, there's the idea that all people, even the righteous, go to Sheol. And again, a lot of this stuff is especially in the Psalms about let me live so that I can continue to praise you. Otherwise, there's no praise or prayers to you from Sheol. And so, again, these are the righteous authors of the Bible that are saying this. But by Jesus' time, there's this concept of Abraham's bosom. And some people referred to it as paradise, which is the Greek term for the Garden of Eden. And in Luke 16:22, Jesus refers to Abraham's bosom. It was seen as a almost like our contemporary view of heaven, where your disembodied spirit is away from earth after you die. And so it was a place that wasn't as bad as the rest of Sheol. It was like the nice place for the righteous people to live without the torment of the rest of Sheol. But still, there was a wait for something greater, for a resurrection, as you get the view from Isaac being, so as to speak, figuratively killed and risen from the grave, as Hebrew talks about him. And then you have even Joseph, the story of Joseph, where he was dead, but then he's alive. And even throughout the Psalms and in Ezekiel, and especially in Daniel, you have this hope for a resurrection, a bodily resurrection and coming back to the life. And especially in Daniel, talking about judging the living and the dead, the righteous and the unrighteous. So then again, you have Tartaro and Abaddon. The Hebrew word for Abaddon is used It's not that often used, but it's used in Job 26:6, Proverbs 27:20, and again, it's referred to by John in the book of the Revelation, and it's not really translated as hell that often. Tartarus is referred to as the bottomless pit throughout the Bible. Again, Revelation 9:1. And it's the epitome of Sheol because it's the deepest, darkest section for only the most wicked, the fallen angels, especially. And again, it's 2 Peter 2:4 that talks about these fallen angels being chained down here. And this is a reference, if you read your extra biblical literature, especially 1 Enoch, you'll know that the fallen angels from Genesis 6:2 that came to sleep with humans against the decree of God were chained down to this darkest pit. Now, this is the interesting one. When we use the word hell, or the word hell in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, is most often the word Gehenna, a translation of the word Gehenna. And Gehenna is the Greek term for the Hebrew valley of Hinnom that you get in Jeremiah chapter 7. You get it in other places in Jeremiah. And you also get it, I think there are some other places, but I'd have to look at it. But so there's some debate over it. There's some people that say that that's not true. But the scholarly consensus, and this, again, is even in extra biblical writings, like, again, 1 Enoch, a very popular Second Temple text, it talks about Gehenna as being not just where people go to after death for punishment, but especially in Christianity, this is the concept of where the unrighteous go to after they have been resurrected from the underworld and are judged to have been unrighteous. And so literally it was a valley just outside of Jerusalem where apostate Israelites gathered to sacrifice their children to the pagan god Molech. And so that's where it comes in Jeremiah 7, and God tells him to preach against these people and how he's just going to make a ruin of this place, Hinnom. And later Jews would burn their garbage in this valley, and it would have an awful stench and a continual fire. And so that's the idea that you have of a continually burning fire. And Jews would go on to develop this idea of Gehenna being a place where the reprobate, that is the people that have rejected God, would suffer after the resurrection outside of the New Jerusalem, because as we'll see, Revelation chapter 21, there's the heavenly Jerusalem coming out of heaven to be on earth. And Jerusalem, as we're about to see, is where God is present. That is the center of creation. Going back to the holiness axis that we first mentioned, Jerusalem, so at the top, at the highest of the high, you have heaven. Below that, you have earth. And below that, you have Sheol. Sheol, no holiness. The exact opposite, negative holiness. Heaven is the holiest because that's where God is. And earth, it has us, human images, as representations of the holiness of God. And so that's vertically speaking. Horizontally speaking, the Bible refers to Jerusalem and to the temple as actually being the center of creation itself. Ezekiel talks about how he actually says that Jerusalem itself is the center of the world. And again, it's talking about the meaning of that. The meaning is that God had blessed Israel to make them a blessing to all the nations. Reference, for example, Genesis chapter 12, when he blesses Abraham and says that through blessing his family, he'll bless all the families of the world. And so to be outside of Jerusalem, to be outside that blessing, that's what hell is. It's, like we always say, the absence of the presence of God. Now, I talked about earlier how in Jonah 2, and there are other passages that speak of this as well, but especially Jonah 2, the chaos waters, the waters are used as images of chaos, and especially in Jonah 2, you can see how it's compared to Sheol. When Jonah's thrown down into the waters, he talks about Sheol taking over him. And in Genesis 1:2, it says that there was welter and waste. So it gives us this idea of chaotic waters. And in the mind of the ancient Near Eastern people, these were waters, they're forces of death, destruction, and chaos. And the Israelites had no different view of this. The difference between their view of these waters and the other their ancient Near Eastern neighbors, was that the God of the Israelites did not struggle to harness their power. The God of the ancient Israelites merely spoke to these chaos waters, and they listened, and they split apart. Psalm 74:12-15 speaks of God's great power over these waters. The other ancient Near Easterns told of their gods struggling with the Leviathan, that sea monster, and the waters to bring about creation. And they had to break a sweat to fight with them. But the God of Israel is all powerful and even walks the Leviathan like a dog. Reference Job 41:1-6. Now, when I was talking of how, God speaks to the waters and they have to listen and separate and bring out the land from them, did that bring any images to mind? That's exactly right. If you're thinking of the Gospels and of how Jesus is on the boat with the disciples and there's a stormy sea and they're in the waters, you're exactly right. You're on to what the New Testament authors are trying to get to you, which is the fact that Jesus is demonstrating himself as being God by having the power over the chaos waters and speaking to them, and they have to listen to him just as they would have to listen on the first page of the Bible. Now, I wanted to switch to the exact opposite end of the cosmos and talk about God and the other quote-unquote gods. So contrary to the thoughts of most Christians today, the Bible does speak of many gods. Take, for example, Psalm 82:1. These gods are also referred to as holy ones, as in Job 15:15, hosts of heaven, Jeremiah 33:22, or sons of God, Genesis 6:2. Son of is a way of saying in Hebrew the class of. So it's speaking about, when it says sons of God, it's talking about the class of God. And again, this cannot be, as it is in the rabbinic Jewish view, speaking to the line of Seth, because it's talking about how these sons of God saw the daughters of humans, the daughters of man, the daughters of Adam. Seth is a son of Adam, and so there's a difference there. However, the Hebrew Bible actually makes it very clear that these gods are not to be praised, as you'll see in Deuteronomy 4:19, 17:3, 2 Kings 23:5, Jeremiah 8:2, so on and so forth, all throughout the Bible, even the Ten Commandments. These gods were created beings, as you see in Genesis 1:14. Again, the lights are living beings. They govern over things. And you even see that also in Psalm 136:7. The difference is that God is eternal. He's all-powerful, and he has no beginning or end. See, for example, Revelation 22:13. And that's why God calls himself I am. Exodus 3:14. I am is a statement to how his existence hinges on nothing. He is the all-immanent one, and he has no cause. God is the most high above all the gods, as in Psalm 97:9, the God of the gods, 10:17, and the Lord of hosts, Isaiah 44:6. And when the Bible says there is no other God besides God, Isaiah 45:5, is simply an expression. Like if I was to say there was no mom besides my mom. It's not that there are literally and physically no other moms that exist. It's just that my mom is the best. And no offense to everybody listening here, but if you were to put all your moms next to my own mom, then it would be as if they don't even exist, because my mom is just so great and epic. And so why is this important? Well, as we see in Deuteronomy 32:8-9, it says this. It says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Now, if you're seeing something that says the sons of Israel, that's actually, and this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but that's actually based on the fact that your translation is taken from the Masoretic text, which is not a bad text, but it's not the oldest text for the Hebrew Bible. The oldest text is the Dead Sea Scrolls. So if you're reading in something like ESV or NRSV, then you will have sons of God here, because that's what that translation says. Now, the word for God here is just El, but the Masoretic text has Israel, and so it has those added on letters. And it should be sons of God, because it says when God gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the numbers of the sons of God. Now think of Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, and the people are working together to build themselves, or build for the gods rather, a gate for them to come down and establish them as one people. And that's when God fixes their borders. Well, there were no sons of Israel. He wasn't alive at that time. And so it can't be according to the number of the sons of Israel, because Israel wasn't around at the Tower of Babel. That would not be until 4 generations later. And so it has to be the number of the sons of God. And then it says that the Lord's portion, Yahweh's portion, is his people. And Jacob, that's a way of talking about Israel, his allotted heritage. In other words, God divided all of the nations and set rulers and principalities over them, each nation and its own gods. But the nation of Israel got the one true living God. And that's why he is called the God of Israel. While all the other nations worship their false gods, Israel is to worship the one true God over them. For this reason, Naaman takes Israel's land with him to worship the one true God. See 2 Kings 5:17. And so, while there are truths to a lot of different atonement theories, there is a truth to the ransom theory that Jesus was a price. He paid the price of his life to buy back the nations. Now, that's not really exactly how that is often articulated, but I think that that is one expression of the truth that when Jesus dies on the cross, that's how he invites Gentiles back into the family of God, is by buying them back from those pagan peoples. And that's how the church, how we are allowed to have non-Jewish believers with us. And so the last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was the two temples. Now, Joel 3:17 says that God lives in Zion, but 2 Chronicles 2:6 says that even the highest heaven cannot contain God. So what does this mean? We can think of God's presence in two ways: his omnipresence and his special presence. And again, this is important for the holiness axis, because if you believe God is everywhere, okay, you're kind of maybe struggling a little bit to understand how God is especially in one place. Because God comes and he resides in the temple, as you see in the beginning of 1 Kings. But even Solomon says that even the highest heavens can't contain him. So yes, God is everywhere, again reference Psalm 139, but he also has a very special presence in the temple. This is because the temple is where heaven and earth meet. The Babylonians from Genesis 11:4, again the Tower of Babel, literally wanted to build up to heaven. This is why ancient temples, which are ziggurats, or you can just picture those kind of pyramids that aren't made from sand. That's what a ziggurat is. They were almost like artificial mountains where people would get close, where people would build stairways for their God to come down to them. Even the temple of the one true living God is built on Mount Zion. You wouldn't build your temple down on a valley. Simply no one did that. And while the earth has its own temple, God also has a temple that is a reflection of the earthly temple. Psalm 11:4, or even think about Hebrews, it says that the tabernacle was a shadow of the heavenly tabernacle. And when Jesus steps into the scene, he claims that he is the temple. Reference John 2:20-21. When he dies, the veil in the temple is torn in two, Matthew 27:51. Because his prophecy of the kingdom of God being at hand was complete. See Mark 1:15, where he says, the kingdom of God is at hand. And so followers of Jesus are told to pray for his kingdom, that's heaven, to finish aligning with earth. That's Matthew 6:10, the Lord's Prayer, as they await his glorious return. In other words, I just want to kind of bring this back into the significance. In other words, there is a lot of significance in this. High mountains are seen where God, that's where God meets people. Think of Sinai. Think of Zion or Jerusalem. These are the places where God meets people, is high up. Because if you're high up, you're closer to the heavens. There is significance and there is meaning in that. It's not about the science that we like to make it about. And in the same way, the waters are seen as destructive and causing chaos. And so going down, waters always falls down. It's always lower. And so the lower you go, you are in parallel. That's how the underworld becomes parallel with this idea of these chaos waters. These chaos waters represent death. They're low down. Low down, you get death, separation from God, and high up, you get the presence of God. And so I kind of want to talk next about how we can make sense of this biblical cosmos even today. So, how do we Christians make sense of the biblical cosmos today? How can Christians cope, quote unquote, with the idea of a flat earth with a firmament and stars that represent spiritual beings? With contemporary physics and our current understanding of the cosmos, we know that the earth is a spheroid without a firmament and that stars are big flaming balls of gas. These are two common ways that biblical scholars make a biblical cosmology. There are two common ways that biblical scholars make a biblical cosmology work with the contemporary understanding of the cosmos. Now, I kind of referenced stars being spiritual beings. I just want to, I know that I'm bringing this out in the middle of nowhere, but this right here is actually not even the furthest point of it. As I noted before, there's the Biblical Cosmos, the Pilgrim's Guide to the Weird and Wonderful World of the Bible, and also Michael Heiser's book, The Unseen Realm, also talks about, it's not exactly on this, but there's a chapter on this, and that talks about the different gods, quote unquote, of the nations and all that. These are some really helpful things, as well as the Bible Project's Classroom on Heaven and Earth, which probably the most impactful for this material that I made, and where I got the understanding that from the Bible, the biblical authors did have a concept of a flat earth. And so how do we cope, so on to say, with that? How do we make sense of that? So metaphysics is what is beyond natural human perception. The Greek word meta means beyond, and physics means nature. Physics is what is within natural explanation. Although the biblical authors believed the earth to literally be flat with a firmament and that the stars were gods, there is reason to believe that they wrote about it in a metaphysical way and not a physical way. In other words, so they did write about it in a physical way as well, but there's a way in which we can read it and understand that the importance is in the metaphysics of it. The authors of the Bibles were not concerned about the scientific physical functions of the earth, but with meaning behind the functions of the earth. So in Psalm 48:2, one can see that the biblical authors believe Zion to be in the north. So take a quick look at a map, and you'll see that Zion was actually in the center of their known world. In relation to Israel, it was in the south. So in no way was it in the north. And obviously David, the author of this psalm, or even if it wasn't David, as a critical scholar might say, any other ancient Israelite who had the money and the education to be able to write this psalm would have known that Zion was anything but in the north. But if it was David especially, he lived in Zion. And they would have known where Zion, the most important city in Israel, was. But he wrote about it being in the north so as to say that it had significance, and not to say that it was literally or physically in the north. There was this mountain in the north called Mount Hermon, where all the ancient Near Eastern deities believed, the ancient Near Eastern people believed their deities to come down. And so it talks about it replacing that. Isaiah 17:12 through 14 speaks of the nations raging like the chaos waters, to say that the chaos waters are a destructive force that brings about decreation. Jeremiah 4:23 even uses the same phrase from Genesis 1:2 that describes the waters being welter and waste, from verses 23 to 26. And he describes how the earth is without life and it's a desert. And this is not making a scientific claim about there being literally no people on the earth and it being a physical desert, but it is, again, making a claim about how the earth is going back into a state of decreation because of the wickedness of the people. By about the 3rd century BCE, it had been hypothesized that the earth was spherical, and by the time of the apostles, it was a common fact. But this did not seem to startle the apostles in the slightest. In fact, they wrote about Jesus literally physically ascending into the heavens again, that they had known was not physically above them. And I do want to take this a step further and say even Second Temple Jewish authors and the church fathers who read this and saw these verses, even they were able to make this conceptually consistent with their own scientific views of the earth. And anyways, another way of understanding the biblical cosmos is to say that God revealed the cosmos to the authors of the Bible in accordance to how much they already knew. Think of how the biblical authors thought about themselves and as humans. Sometimes they spoke about God in these same ways, as in Genesis 3, walking in the garden. Or they talk about his wind or his breath. In the 2nd verse, hovering over the waters. It's translated as spirit. Many times it talks about God's hand, or in Exodus 33 it talks about God removing his hand from Moses so he can see his back. It's talking about God in a way that they already can understand things. And so since the authors of the Bible could not conceive of the earth without thinking about it being flat and with a firmament, that was how God decided to speak to them. It's not that God was lying to them, rather he was communicating to the people at that time in a way that was understandable. Since God is infinitely transcendent and all-knowing, he simply would not be able to communicate to us mortals with our finite understanding while using all of his knowledge and power. There's no way us humans could understand that. And so in his grace and mercy, he has chosen to communicate to us in a way that we can actually understand. And for that, we should be happy, we should be grateful, and we should even respond in praise. And so thank you all for tuning in to this episode of The Babylonian. I want to remind you that the notes for this podcast are in the link to this podcast episode, wherever you listen to it. And if you found this episode particularly interesting, don't feel afraid to share it with friends. They might find it just as surprising as you did. So as always, thank you, and see you again in Bible.